Hey everybody, welcome to the Holistic First Responders podcast. Today we're lucky enough to have Union President Billy McAllister on the show, and we're going to explore the union's role in firefighter health and wellness and Billy's own journey as a firefighter, paramedic, and now head of the union. Billy, thank you for coming on the show.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too, my brother. So before the camera started rolling, we were talking about your experience as a firefighter, paramedic, and how you started to recognize signs of stress and burnout. Maybe you can start there and give everybody a little bit of background on your career and how you got to this position and why you wanted to take this position.
Okay. Thanks for having me on the show. I guess we can start just chronologically speaking. I was hired in 2002. I was 22 years old and full of energy and ready to take on the world. And I went to the busiest firehouse I could, and I worked on Rescue 7 for the entirety of my time as a firefighter before being promoted. And if anyone knows Battalion 5 and some of the stories that come out of that battalion, those units always run.
Didn't you guys have like a nickname like the Black Hearts or something?
No, that was 19.
19.
We were fighting 7.
Fighting 7.
Yeah, there was a boxer that actually would stop traffic in both directions for us on 79th Street. He had the full regalia on. They'd go out there, and he would stop traffic so that we get somewhere faster. The newer police officers in the neighborhood sometimes would arrest him because he had stolen one of our traffic vests. But really what we had done is we'd given it to him
so he didn't get
keep
hit.
It a little safer.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a legend in the firehouse, and we had him over several times for like big events, 65-year anniversary and things like that. The guy was a legend.
So what Rescue 7 is where?
95th and Northwest 22nd Avenue. It's in West Little River. It's sort of sandwiched between Liberty City and Opelika, and to the east is Miami Shores.
Yes, yeah. I remember now.
So it nonstop. It's a 24-hour house. Running 4 to 5 calls after midnight is not uncommon.
I seem to remember a lot of fires around there too, like older structures.
Yeah, it's an older area of Miami, and it was the reason at 22 going into 23 years old that I went there, because I looked to see where the business rescue companies were in Miami-Dade County, and the third most frequently first arriving MDFR unit on fires was Rescue 7.
Wow.
So I ran there.
Yeah.
If I can go to more fires than almost every fire truck in Dade County, that's where I'm going to go.
Wow.
So it was everything I hoped for and more. I worked with incredible guys, and the camaraderie was what you see in movies. But with that, you're there at 7 a.m. and you're still spending time with each other at midnight. Then you run 4 or 5 after midnight. And that wears on you. And you don't notice because it's subtle over time. But then you start staying at the station past 7. You sleep in a little later. Then you count yourself in on breakfast at 8:30. And then before you know it, you wake up and it's nearly lunchtime. And I saw that and I felt what was going on with me. And I knew that wasn't healthy. So a few years in, my partner and I saw an opportunity to go to training and just teach standard operating procedures. Like basically the rules that you would need to follow so you didn't get hurt on your first day. So we went there to training and taught for 4 months, 2 classes. And I intentionally chose Wednesday as my day off. I would work 4 10-hour days. And so I had a regularity. I had Monday, Tuesday, off Wednesday, work Thursday, Friday, off the weekend. And it took several months for me to get my sleep schedule back, where I would go to sleep at a usual time and wake up at a usual time. And then seeing it, my mid-20s, seeing how much that affected me, both going down and then rebounding, I became very defensive of it. I started to set rules for what I guess you would call now a sleep hygiene. I would start to gate back earlier instead of waiting till midnight to think about taking a shower, which wouldn't happen if it got busy. And then I would start cutting my day off at 9 p.m. Realized that didn't allow me enough time with the call volumes. Gated back to 8, and my sweet spot was 7 p.m. It didn't mean I was going to sleep. It just meant I took 30 minutes for myself to do the things I needed to do so that I could go the next 12 hours. It was your routine. It was my routine. And then, the guys that work with me over the years know that I would still be up until 12 or 1 in the morning at the station after that. But I took that break in the middle of the day for myself. Right. I needed to get it through that 24-hour period. And, over time, I kept checking in on myself regularly. as it relates to sleep. And I tried to do the best thing I could, which was take time off when I needed to keep recovering, because I didn't want to work somewhere slower. I love the job. I love who I'm working with. I didn't want to go anywhere. I needed to adapt to the circumstances.
I see that a lot with firefighters and first responders online. When you post things, especially me, because I'm posting more health conscious things, there's a lot of pushback because guys love the job so much. They take so much pride in what they do that they're like, I don't even care about myself. I'm doing this for the community.
Yeah.
And I, respect that. But I also think that if you want to do something for the community for a long time, you should take care of yourself. You don't need to sacrifice yourself to be a good firefighter. Right. You can do both, which is what you began to do. How many years in were you when you started to notice the wear and tear before you went into the SOPs?
It was probably about 2 years in. It was the silliest thing that happened. I always drove the truck. 18 months in, all of a sudden I'm going home, my one knee hurt. And what is that? I kept thinking, what is it? I'm thinking about, is it doing something at the gym, whatever? Then I realized I'm a kid, top step of the rescue, bounding down 27 times a day out of the truck.
27 calls a day?
It was anywhere from 15 to 25. You'd have 30, but you
get in and out for lunch.
Right.
Yeah.
The wear and tear was already, I could feel it.
Yeah.
So I realized, that's why the older guys get out of the truck and they climb down. They take all the steps. There's a reason all the steps exist, right? Yeah. So I decided, all right, I don't want to blow up my knee, so I'll just step out more gently. That was probably the first time I'm like, man, this place can really tear you up. Minor things like that over time will add up to serious injuries.
Yeah, and you were 24, 25 at the time. Imagine you're a guy who gets on 30, 35, and now you're dealing, because when you're new, you're going to go to the busy stations, and rightfully so, because, if you've already been running calls at the busy stations, the fire department advocates for you to go to a slower station because this way you can have a longer career.
Right.
Because if you're going to be at station 7 your whole career, it's going to do a lot of damage to you, even though you're doing it with good intentions. It's going to end up hurting you in the long run and hurting your family in the long run, because what happens to you is not an isolated incident. I remember coming home from work, not wanting to talk to anybody, being quick to blow up on my kids, and feeling like I didn't want to be in public. And this, of course, is when I was getting really sick. And I expedited this process, I believed, with my behavior outside the fire department, because nobody ever told me what kind of stress levels we're going to be under. They were like, oh, this job is different. But there was no SOP for how to live outside the fire department. It's like, what's the standard operating procedure for when you run 25 calls a day? Right. Some guys will go home, and I saw a post the other day. This is what I do after a busy day at the firehouse. It works for me. It might not work for everybody. I power through the day. And a lot of guys power through the day, not just because they want to, but we got kids. Yeah. They got second jobs. Yep. They got a life to live. So you're going on limited sleep and you're powering through the day. And then a lot of guys are hard chargers. Like most people that become firefighters or police are hard charging guys, So they go work out. They have a second job. And then they're adding stress on top of the stress. And it's okay when you're in your 20s. You don't notice it as much. But for me, it started creeping up on me at about like 32, 33. And I started to get anxiety, depression. I had an arrhythmia in my heart, low libido, quick to snap at people. And one day my wife says, I haven't seen you smile in weeks. And that's when I started to kind of like think, there's something going on. Because it's like you said, it's a slow burn.
Right.
You don't notice it. It doesn't happen one day to the next. It's just a little bit more. And then what happens is you start to feel tired. So naturally, what do? Drink more caffeine.
Right.
You walked in here with a Red Bull.
Absolutely.
It's 5 o'clock p.m.?
Yeah.
So that's going to affect your sleep at night.
Not so much. I got a tolerance. I'm okay.
But what I'll say is not necessarily you.
Yeah.
But, the data shows caffeine disrupts sleep.
Yes.
So if you're already somebody dealing with sleep issues, then you have to be hypervigilant on how much caffeine you drink. But nobody tells you that.
Right.
And
the image I have of you is when you first got on. You were one of the funniest people I've ever seen. Your comedic routines where you would imitate people was legendary. Like that's still the first memory I have of knowing you and then having you at the firehouse for the day, telling you to do those things. Yeah. Hey, do the imitation so-and-so. And it was Dead on. So the fact that evolved very quickly over time to anger, frustration, depression, all of those negative things is obvious that they can have a profound effect on you. It absolutely can.
Yeah. And I think more important that we really got to get guys and gals to understand is that it's not the job that kills you. It's what you do on your 48 off.
Yes.
Because the job is the job. You know, you're going to run calls, especially early on. If you don't have any seniority or any certs, you're going to run calls. But if you're going home and living like Joe Blow, who sleeps throughout the night, you're keeping up with your buddies. You're still going out. You're still partying. You know, you're still doing things that you used to do, but now you're doing them in a compromised state. That's what creates the problems. And there's no education on that. As union president, have you seen a shift in the collective consciousness of the fire department to train guys better, to focus on not just, you know, firefighting and medical calls, but also health and wellness, mentally, physically, emotionally?
Yeah. In the past 5 years, I've been union president for 5 years now. We've really tried to put a focus on more proactive health measures, more testing to determine there's a problem that's small and easy to fix. And then that's the first thing, is trying to catch problems that have already developed while they're small, physically speaking. When it comes to preventing those from occurring in the first place, we fought very hard to get 2 sets of bunker gear from top to bottom, with the exception of helmets and boots. Everything else, 2 sets for every individual firefighter. We're 2,400 members at this point. And that's a serious expense, but it was a commitment to the idea that you shouldn't be putting contaminated bunker gear with known carcinogens on it back in the truck in your riding position to expose your crew that you're going to ride with for the rest of the shift and the crews that are coming in the following day, when there's a better way. If it's contaminated with blood, it's biohazard. What do? We take off gloves, we put it in a red bag, goes in a bin.
Wow.
But with carcinogens that are known to cause cancer in humans, we just throw it back in the seat we're sitting on. We lean back on the jacket and you smell it. There was 2 points for me that made me really to hone in on that. One, I love going to fires. I always do. I always will. You come in a rush.
Yeah.
You go in and there's something chaotic and out of control, and you get to go in, and most of the time it works out. And you turn back this force of nature, and it's pretty amazing. But there's 2 memories that I have that I'll share with you that provoked me to push in this direction. The first one was, I remember as a little kid, my dad was a captain. He was a fire investigator for 17 years. He would come home with Krispy Kreme donuts on the weekends when he had fires in the North End. I remember as a little kid grabbing his leg and hugging him, and I remember the Krispy Kreme donuts. I remember the smell of smoke on his legs. And I don't want this next generation I want them to bring home the Krispy Kreme donuts.
Right.
I don't want
them to bring home the
carcinogens that cause issues with kids. The second issue is, one of my best friends, and you know Derek Irwin because he was in your class. Derek Irwin was my best friend since the 3rd grade. I convinced him by telling him about all the fun stuff we do to become an MDFR firefighter. Fast forward, he ends up in LA County. He has a son that is born with a congenital form of cancer growing along his spine.
Wow.
And it was an extremely rare cancer that would develop congenitally, except for the fact that another guy of the 10 or so that are in the training cadre for LA County, their child was also born with it. Then they realized Derek Derek
Sharp.
Smartest person I've ever met by far. He got into it, and you start to realize it's the glues and the wood that we're burning for the purpose of training that's exposing me and causing this to potentially occur in my child. So it's not really something that you wash off. It's something that affects your DNA.
Yeah.
Derek could come on the show and impress everybody and just talk about the methylation of DNA and all those things, because he's since gotten his PhD in this.
I saw.
He's opened a lab at UCLA, and he's working with the International Association of Firefighters as their chief science officer. So for me, I was like, I'm union president. We got to do better. We have the resources. We have the manpower. We have to do better so that everyone has the opportunity to retire a little bit healthier.
Yeah.
Less chance of horribleness afflicting them when they finally get to the end of their career, or even during it at this point.
For sure.
Each month, I'm I'm getting 1 or 2, 3 notifications that active members are being diagnosed with cancer.
Yep.
It's troubling. So at this point now, we're turning the corner to get the idea that dirty gear was a badge of honor. Dirty gear that gets taken off at the truck and bagged and washed is the future. You talk about a lot about athletics and athletes, and that's what we are, except for the fact right now we're behaving like 1970s football players. Like
Yes.
we're expendable.
Yes.
Crushing beer cans on our head and shake it off, and that's a concussion. Oh, there's 7 of them. Oh, you died early.
Right.
Now I see what football does. They treat them as though they're valuable, and
For
that's
sure.
really what I'm trying to do. And that's just
That's what you're
physical
doing.
side. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the mental health side too, and that's the other half of the equation here. Yeah.
Yeah. Coming back to your point, when it comes to the training that guys are doing and, the gear, it's important to recognize the carcinogens as being part of the problem. But I remember when we were fighting fires, every time that you would be at the fire, you would have to do overhaul. And I remember, this was 13 years ago, that I would wear my mask and I would get shit for it when I was doing overhaul. Like, people would give me a hard time. How's the culture shifting now that we're starting to understand the seriousness of these things?
Cultural movement's glacial, super slow. I can tell you from your experience to now, it's gotten tremendously better. Is it to the point where everyone has the behaviors and the practices you do? Not yet. Because it's one of those things that the first 20%, they're the early adopters. They're in. Then you get the middle sort of 60%, and they'll adopt pretty quickly. It's the others that have either been there too long to want to change their practices, or they look up to being new to the ones that are resistant to the change being pushed. That's still where we have work to do.
Yeah.
We still have work to do absolutely on that. I think we always will, because there's one thing about us as firefighters, like we are obstinate, and that's why we're successful. I mean, a building's on fire, someone's trapped inside. The average person might go, well,
Hold my beer.
It doesn't work. Yeah, we're like, well, we'll knock the wall down. We'll drive a truck through it to bring a person out.
Right.
Most people don't think that destructively, and that destructiveness sometimes affects us internally, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of mental health, how do you think the toll of traumatic calls, especially someone like you who probably ran hundreds of traumatic medical calls, how do you think that affects guys' long-term mental health?
I've seen such a wide range of the way people deal with it that it's probably the biggest challenge we have. If we're talking about somebody with a broken hip, there's only so many ways we can break a hip. There's only so many ways you can repair a hip. Like, there's not an infinite number of interactions. For me, my way of always dealing with it and steeling myself to the idea that I don't want to be affected by it is we trained. And when I struggled with an experience, I went back and said, I rationalized it for myself. And I said, well, this was a really bad call. So I looked at the metrics. We got there really fast. Man, we were only on scene for 4 minutes. We got in the trauma center in 8 minutes. So 16 minutes after their life was circling the drain, we had them in front of a surgeon. And I mean, we did the best we could to turn back what was naturally going to occur. That didn't always work. Sometimes it was like, I'm not going to work next shift. I have sick time for a reason, and it's not just physical sickness. I don't need a runny nose. If I wake up before 6 a.m. and my first thought is about that call, I don't want to be distracted on my shift. I don't want to be in a bad mood. I don't want to miss something. I didn't sleep well last night because of it. I didn't go. And as a result, I never had an injury on the job that debilitated me.
Right.
Everybody has the little ones. And I never had a complaint. And working in an area that can be rough sometimes, I never had a complaint filed against me.
Yeah, that's a rough one.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, but you also need to have that well of patience and that frame of reference where you can really get through the day. So that was my way of dealing with it. But when you talk about the range of people, I sort of instilled that in the guys that chose to work with me. But it doesn't help when you say those things and you show that to somebody who says, hey, Cap, this is bothering me. And you explain all these things we just talked about, numbers and all those things. He goes, yeah, but the kid we pulled out of the car that had ruptured his aorta that died in our hands looked like my nephew.
Mm-hmm.
you can't talk your way through that logically.
Yeah.
You got to process it emotionally.
Yeah.
And it was experiences like that sort of, when I became union president, I go, how do we fix that? Well, you need an outlet, because there's one thing for sure that you and I are not going to do if we're working together 20 years ago. You're not going to tell me your feelings are hurt. You're not going to tell me that you're struggling with something. You may, after a period of years working with me, I might pick up on the fact that something's wrong. And if I ask, you might disclose it. But that isn't the culture of the firehouse. Like, it's rough and tumble. And that's partly how we process some of these things, because the jokes and the practical jokes and all those things is also how we distract ourselves from that thing. We put it away in the memory bank.
Yeah.
And sometimes it gets deleted and you forget it. And sometimes they stay with you.
Yeah.
And so we ended up, after Surfside, setting up a hotline where if you called, it was anonymous, it was free, and you could talk to a counselor. I was shocked. I was floored that in the first year, nearly 100 of our members called and consumed 1,000 mental health sessions.
Wow.
Yeah. I was shocked.
Shows you how necessary it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, in the wake of Surfside, those guys saw, and those women saw so many things that no one should see, but they were there and they saw it. And they knew they needed to process it. And when they knew it was free and it was anonymous, they called.
Yeah.
So,
anonymous is big.
Huge.
Because when I was waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks. And you know what a heart attack sign is. So you start putting it all together, you know? You're like, I'm having a heart attack.
Yep.
My heart is beating so fast. It's out of control. You don't want to wake up your wife, you know? So you like sneak out of bed. You don't tell nobody. I leave the house. I drive to the fire station because I'm like, at least they'll save my life if I'm dying. I couldn't even go inside because I was scared that I would show weakness and that people would get around. Now, Kelly came in with a panic attack.
Yeah.
You know, like, and then I felt even more trapped because I can't tell the guys. I'm not telling my family because I don't want them to worry. I don't want to seem weak in front of the guys. And I'm going down this cycle where it's happening more often. And I'm getting to the point to where I'm like, I don't know if I can live like this anymore. You know, growing up, I was like, why would anybody commit suicide? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard in my life. Life is never that bad. But then you get to a space where things seem really dark and you don't know how to get out. And it actually begins to look a little appealing because you're like, I can end this pain right now because I've lived with it for 6 months and it's not getting better. It's only getting worse. And I don't know what to do. There's no tools out there. At the time, this was, 13 years ago, there was no Whoop rings to know what your recovery score was, Right. We had a physical, but all they did was blood work. They weren't testing our hormones, So we didn't know where we were at that moment in time. And most people thought, health was working out, eating right. But now we know health is getting good sleep, managing your stress, of course, eating right, and of course, training correctly. But if you're in a position where the culture is so masculine and alpha male that you can't show weakness, it puts you in this space where suicide becomes an option. And we've seen that this year. We've lost franchise firefighters. We're not talking about like a guy who retired. Because when I was on, I used to hear, oh, this guy, he retired and he killed himself because he lost that brotherhood, But now we're talking about guys that are on. We're talking about guys that are well known, like the Tom Brady's of it. Maybe you can kind of give us your opinion on that darkness that a lot of guys find themselves in and what we can do, you as union president, me as a holistic wellness coach, to help guys get out of there.
If I knew the answer to that, I would sleep better at night. I don't know. I know that we have to start trying to do things. So the hotline, counseling, those things, that's one outlet. And we're adding to that as we move along in hopes that we can just cast a wide enough net for the innumerable number of ways that somebody, or for the reasons somebody might be struggling, to let them know it's going to be okay. Like, you will get through this. And if you ask, we can help you get through it. I mean, the number of firefighters that I've spoken to that either did contemplate it or nearly did it and they openly told me that, scares me. It absolutely scares me because it is so prevalent. It is an outlet that is considered, and it's like you can't run fast enough toward a solution, but you don't know what it is because it's different for each person.
Right.
That's really the part. That's the magic that we haven't figured out yet.
Yeah.
So it's like focus on health, focus on physical health, focus on giving access, but I don't want to lose another one.
No, I think personally, based upon what I went through, what helped me get out of the darkness, once I actually learned what I was doing, I had to leave the fire department because I didn't see a way that I could do both, get out and stay on. Because at that point, I was scared to go to work. You know, I was so overwhelmed with anxiety and stress. So I left. But then over the years, I began to learn strategies to reduce stress. And I think as a whole, fire departments around the country and around the world need to start making stress management part of the training when it comes to not just new recruits, but current guys on.
Yeah.
You know, I can remember countless times where we're drilling how to pull hose, how to hook up to the hydrants, how to run a certain call, how to do high rises, but there's no training on stress management. There's no classes on how to take your nervous system from fight or flight to rest and digest, because you know as well as I do, when you're in a heightened state of alertness all the time, you end up living in fight or flight.
Right.
Now, if you live in that state, eventually disease occurs because humans aren't meant to live in fight or flight 24/7. But for some reason, as first responders, we find ourselves in that because we train ourselves to do that. So what I want to see in the fire department is a proactive program that begins to teach guys not just stress management techniques, which could be simple as breath work. You don't see guys in the station doing breath work. Now you might start to see it, but there should be a class on it. Like there should be facilitators coming in teaching breath work, teaching meditation, because the nervous system is directed by the breath. So when you go on a fire or a workout, that's telling your body, fight or flight, let's get those hormones going, let's get those neurotransmitters going. Boom, you start to come down, you're back in it. You start to come down, you're back in it. Cortisol levels through the roof. What happens when cortisol goes up? Melatonin goes down. Your sleep goes down. What also happens? Testosterone drops. You know, there's studies showing that firefighters have much less testosterone than the average person. And what does hormone dysfunction do? Creates mental illness. So we need to start looking at the hormones. We need to start looking at proactive stress management because your sleep is directly related to your stress. So when you went on those 410s, you were able to lower your stress and you were able to get your sleep back because your stress levels were lower. So I always say that firefighters have a different hierarchy of health than the normal person. If you're sleeping, you got a normal job, you're sleeping 8 hours a night, you don't really have sleep issues. When you're getting up 5 times a night, even when you're off shift, you have sleep issues. Now, how do we attack sleep issues? We know we're not going to change the call volume, but we can change the way we prioritize our sleep like you did at home. We can change the way we look at stress from multiple angles, from not just, like holistic practices like yoga and breath work, but also what are you eating? Because food is a stressor. It creates more cortisol if you're eating the wrong foods. And then how are you training? How are you exercising? I see a lot of videos where guys are like, this is the workout I did in the firehouse. And the workout is hard. If you, Billy, at Rescue 7 would have done like I remember the 300 workout. Remember that workout?
Yes,
It was going around the firehouse, right?
Yep.
I remember I'm doing that workout at down south. I forget what station, but it was like, West Kendall. I'm doing that workout. I'm on pace to beat the record. Boom, we get a code. Go there. Now I'm performing CPR. And yes. the officer goes, Kelly, if the heart attack doesn't kill him, you're going to drown him.
Right.
Because I'm sweating so much over the guy. Then you go and you run 3 calls, 4 calls after midnight. You've put yourself in a worse position by exercising hard at the fire department. We need to teach guys when you're on shift, you need to preserve yourself as much as possible. You don't know what's coming. Like you said, we're athletes, but we don't know when the game's going to be.
Right.
So we have to prepare like it's game day when we're on shift. Then when you come off shift, you can use something like a wearable, which will tell you your stress levels. And then you can use that data to make the necessary lifestyle adjustments to put yourself in a better position. So my goal, honestly, with the Holistic First Responders podcast, my Instagram, is to help fire departments through my experience as a health coach and as a firefighter to build proactive programs that are going to allow guys breathing room. Because it's not one thing, like you just said, we don't know what's going to keep guys staying alive and keep guys from going down that rabbit hole. But we know that it's a comprehensive approach, that you have to look at everything as a whole. And that's really where I want to see the direction of training go. Because I feel like Miami-Dade is one of the best fire departments in the country, right? But after the latest incident that we had, a workout came out in honor of Captain Gustin, and the workout was a 47-minute workout because he served 47 years in the fire service, and it had the option to wear your gear while you did it. Yeah. That workout will knock the shit out of the world-class athletes, and a lot of guys are going to do that workout in honor of him. They want to feel the pain. They want to do it in honor of him. But if you're coming off a bad shift or you're work at a busy station, that workout, you shouldn't do that workout.
And it actually, the training division, and I hope that the training captains aren't still too upset with me, they wanted to do that workout in the 3 days that the International Association of Firefighters had sent dozens of mental health experts and peer support firefighters to go to every firehouse in Dade County on each shift to open up and talk about the loss of Captain Gustin. And they wanted to do that workout. And I had to talk to the fire chief. I'm like, those 3 days belong to us. We've invited our peers and our friends from all over the country and around the state to come in and help process the emotional, like this tragedy and how much it affects each of us. I worked with him for years.
I know.
I took last week off and didn't come to the office for a week. I did work at home, but I had so many little things I needed to focus on myself. I stayed at home, and I knew that if we kept running ourselves into the ground and doing that workout, because it was befitting of Captain Gustin, because he used to go and hit that treadmill and a stair climber at Station 2 every morning. He would run circles around any one of us at 60, at 50. He was a better trained athlete for the fire service than, I would say, 2/3 of the guys on the job right now.
For sure.
He was so dedicated to preserving his ability to keep going. It's definitely one of those things that, I struggled with that decision because I knew it wasn't going to be popular, but I said, we have to focus first on what we're feeling. And then we'll go do that workout, but certainly not right now. Let's do one thing at a time.
Yeah, and maybe you can speak a little bit more about how you started to look at things that maybe before you weren't noticing, but now you wanted to get a little more granular with it so that you could have a little bit more space for yourself.
You mean in the role as union president, how I adapt that?
No, about your own personal experience over this last week where you took that time off.
I worked with him for a bit, and it was a gut punch. I worked with him for a few years. I got promoted to lieutenant. We worked together as a lieutenant, and when I was a bouncing lieutenant for a little while. Then I moved to A shift on Rescue 7. But we still talked, and I would call him on calls I wasn't sure I handled right, and he would call me on his days off to talk about the call that he wasn't sure. I feel like he was doing it as much for me to teach me as he was being that superhuman he was, of saying like, hey, I did this one little thing wrong that had no effect, but I learned from it. And he was processing it, but I was taking it in and learning it. And when I got the call in the morning that he was gone, I sat for about 15 minutes and I almost called my fire chief back because I knew what I heard, but I couldn't believe it. And I didn't get up and start moving until the next person called me. And then I knew like this nightmare was real. And I've always seen a lot of what he does and what I do. And I realized like the lesson that I need to take from his departure was I need to focus on myself. And this job as union president is like being at Rescue 19, during a riot while a hurricane is going on sometimes. It never stops, and the volume is tremendous. So it was like, you know what? I'm taking this week off because I jokingly been saying to my staff in the office, like, the most frustrating part of my morning is when I haven't done enough laundry and I run out of socks. Like that was happening. And I was like, I need to sit down and really audit the things that are frustrating me, however minute, because they're grains of sand. And if you start your morning and don't have socks and the dog and these things, you have 5 things that are frustrating that were frustrating yesterday, but you didn't deal with them and they're happening again. It builds up over time. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to learn from Captain G here. I'm going to take a week. I'm just going to make a list. And I sat there and that list was a full page on one side and half of the next page of things that were too minor to care about. Like, right. You look at it and be like, that's no big deal. And it wasn't. And that's why I wasn't doing it. But it was a page and a half of silly little things I hadn't done. And that week wasn't enough time. I did about half of it. But I've already decided I got to do that again. When my schedule permits, when I can find the time where everything's not that important, that I can push it a week or I can move it earlier or later in the same week, I'm going to find another week to do that and focus on me. And it's kind of another version of what I did when I noticed my sleep schedule. And this time it's learning from that moment and the experience I had with his death to check in and go, man, I am pretty far off base on some of these things. I need to narrow in so I can be better at the job I'm doing 100%. Now to represent 2,400 firefighters and their families and retirees and all that.
Yeah. You don't even mention the retirees.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you're the father of the department.
I'm too young for that, but yeah, I get the reference. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So your mind is going to be on a lot. You're always going to be thinking about your guys. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about the First Responder Resiliency Foundation?
Yeah. The after Surfside, the morning of Surfside, I actually got a phone call from Ed Kelly, the general president for the International. He goes, Billy, what do you need? And I'm looking at a building that's still, 4 stories tall, except it's now pancaked. And I see the faces of our Task Force 1 guys coming off the pile. And I told them, I think we've got the resources coming to deal with this, the physicality of this tragedy, to take this building that's collapsed on itself apart and see if we find victims. I go, but I'm worried about what they're seeing, people that are pancaked with the building. And there's a firefighter's daughter in there. Like, there's so many things that they're experiencing that I could see their faces. They're pulling out their phones, and people that know someone in that building are texting them, hey, apartment X, is there anybody surviving? Like, immediately it was hometown. It wasn't we got deployed to a far off place.
Right.
It was right here.
It was in your circle.
It was right here. And I said we needed help. And that's when Ed Kelly sent individuals from that experienced World Trade Center and places from around the country to help them process the emotions. And the moment for me for First Responders Resiliency Foundation, the germ of it, was Frank Lito. So Frank Lito said, you have 18 months. And I said, what do you mean? Because you have 18 months until these individuals that are failing to process this, they're having a problem with it, become problem firefighters. They're going to be in trouble for drinking, drugs, all the coping mechanisms that are ineffective, but they're trying to process this in other ways.
For sure.
And he was right. Like, that phone line started to light up. People tried to find a better way to deal with it. So the mayor and I talked, and in contract negotiations, I said, hey, I need money to fund this. And her background being in mental health counseling and being a social worker, she understood it. And we got the funding and we built this thing out. And now the thing that still troubles me is we can't offer this yet to other firefighters or police officers. The other 5 fire departments in Dade County don't yet have access to it. So we're working. Well, it's an IRS rule. Like, the funds can't be used for those that aren't 1403 members, those union members. So we're working with our friends in Tallahassee to get additional funding that we can bring in so that we can tell them, call this number. And then the logo is actually gold with a red and blue line through the center for a reason. The gold represents our dispatchers. And then the red is obviously for firefighters, but the blue line is us future planning to offer it to police officers, because we were joking about this earlier. We all get back in the truck and we're able to kind of blow it off or compartmentalize it, maybe delete the memory or replace it with a funny joke. police officers, they see the same things we see. And sometimes we get to leave. Hey, how can we help? And people are being arrested for domestic assault and all those things. We get to leave. There's no help needed. We get to leave. They have to arrest individuals. They have to tear families apart, and they have to process that. And when it's over, they get in their car by themselves. They get in their car by themselves, and they have to process that by themselves. And their only real points of contact is if they meet up to have coffee, or some of them in areas like Station 7 and the busier houses, the cops come to the firehouse. And you know why? They feel part of that community.
For sure.
So when we put together the First Responders Resiliency Foundation, we knew we would start within 1403, but we were going to look to expand it to help them as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure they deal with sleep deprivation too, because they're working overnight and they have to be awake.
Yeah.
We at least get to go to sleep.
Yeah. Their problem is they have to stay awake the entire time. We try to lay down 5 times to take 4 naps, and the bell goes off, we run out the door. We go from a resting heart rate of 45 because we take care of ourselves to 120, 90 seconds later, we're in front of a door we're forcing open to go inside to put out a fire. And that's all over in 15 minutes. And then we walk off and we're heat stressed because we're in our gear. We've been working very hard. We strip that off. We're a puddle of sweat. And after your 4th or 5th call after midnight, you might say, I'm just going to go to sleep in one of the lazy boys because I don't want to shower and I don't want to contaminate the bed. And there that cycle starts again. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know any police personally that, like the police union head that you've been talking to and working with?
I was with Stedman before I came here. It's a challenge they face also, and to their credit, they identified the need for psychiatric services and psychological services early, and they put that in as part of their department. MDFR in 2020 started to build out a mental health component, and it's really started to grow. And I feel like my responsibility in this moment, while I'm here in this role, is to set it on the right path so that they aren't competitive. So that the fire department can take care of employees if they choose that avenue. It's very important, and I think every firefighter listening to this should internalize this. If you're experiencing a problem and you need to report it so that you have coverage, you have to go to your employer. You have to report that you have a psychological issue so that if that does turn into PTSD and it leads in the direction of you having to retire, you have a claim.
Wow.
If you talk to through insurance, you talk to a psychologist or you call the resiliency line and you never document it, you're going to have a hard time getting coverage for an on the job injury. So even if you start by calling anonymously and it continues to manifest and get worse, and even if you go and you talk to a third party and it keeps getting worse, at some point you have to file a claim. Even if you don't want to use them as the provider of care, you've got to check that box in order to be covered if you need treatment long-term or later in your career or after you retire. That's a very important point.
I love that. I love that because we got to start thinking about retirement.
Yeah.
Because the average first responder dies 5 years after retirement because we're not building in the systems now. We're not covering ourselves. And covering yourself is making sure you file a claim. Covering yourself is also identifying the areas in your life that you can be proactive and make sure you're being responsible for yourself, because you have 2,400 firefighters to think about. As a firefighter, or even as a station captain or a lieutenant, you have a couple guys. So we need to start thinking top down, from the training department to the battalion chiefs, to the station captains, to the acting officers. There needs to be a shift in the culture when it comes to covering yourself.
I agree with you. And leadership comes from the top down because the fire chief sets the standard. He has his vision. He has a chain of command that can direct changes. But the culture comes from the bottom up. It comes from me if I'm on the back step with you going, hey, man, we just had that fire. I changed out my gear. Change out yours. Like making sure that in each truck and then in each house and in each battalion, we're starting to do it our way.
Wow.
And I mean that in the most positive way possible.
For sure.
And then the directionality comes from the fire chief.
Yeah.
But in the middle, there should be synergies that come from being on the same page and rowing the same direction. And that's always the challenge, is trying to figure out how you get that synced up to make it work.
I think it comes back to education.
Yeah.
Because, when you're going through training, You're obviously being taught the SOPs of a house fire or a high rise, but what's the SOP for coming off a shift when you haven't got any sleep? What's the SOP for how you should eat or exercise on shift? What's the SOP for how you assess yourself on a regular basis? You alluded to it earlier, assessing yourself with your journaling after the passing of Captain Gustin allowed you to recognize things before they became a problem or a bigger problem, you know, and self-assessment through the body and the mind, I think needs to be a topic of discussion, not just like you said from the top, but also amongst the guys.
I think you're onto something there with it being self-assessment, because each person has a different like listing of their strengths and weaknesses. Each one has a different experience set walking onto the job. They have different responsibilities, whether older parents or children or animals or those things they go home to. So the sum total of those things is going to be unique for each person. That self-assessment, I think, is why I've always done that. Like I'm prone to experiment with different stuff. So I read an article, I don't know, 2005, where they were doing a study on using contrast therapy.
Yeah.
Cold shower, sauna or steam room, back and forth several times, and it actually would cause your lymph to pump toxins that you recently absorbed through your skin out.
Wow.
So I started trying it. I have a couple warehouse fires. I'm like, I go back to my building. I take a cold shower that's like only a crazy person would do. And then I would get in the steam room. I would go shower again. And I smelled smoke a lot. And I thought it was in my sinus cavity. I thought it was me smelling inside my lungs and whatnot. And I'm sitting in the steam room one time. I did this. I started to do it much more frequently on really serious fires. I'm sitting from me to you inside the steam room after, I don't know, a couple cycles of this. And all of a sudden, the guy sitting next to me jumps up. You smell smoke? I smell fire. I'm like, wow, no, that's me.
That's insane.
I'm off-gassing.
Wow.
And I would take a clean towel each time and wipe off. And you would see dark gray. It's
yeah.
like, so this clearly is working. And it's something that I think we're still in that experimental phase of what actually everyone should do and then what each person should do.
Yeah. Like the principles, the foundation.
Absolutely.
And then like toggling up and down based upon your age, your experience level, your call volume, your family life.
Yeah.
That's where the rubber meets the road. Because I mean, the information is out there, right? But how do we get each guy to see themselves in that and how that they can best serve themselves? So what you're saying is in the future, we're going to have saunas and cold plunges at the station.
Guys have been experimenting with that. We go through these cycles where it catches on and individuals do it. And then, you know, some people take it and they make it part of what they do. I think that's part of what you're talking about here is I think that it does need to be somewhat of a personal journey reacting to what they're dealing with. That probably is the next step here. We're still in the top of the second inning.
For sure.
Trying to figure this out.
For sure.
There's a lot of work to be done.
It took me 8 years to figure out all this stuff. Like you said, you know, you got to do research, you got to experiment, and then you got to see how it works.
Right.
You know, and I had experimented with the supplements. I experimented with the peptides. I experimented with different sleep schedules. I experimented with different data, different tests. I got the DNA test. I got the Dutch test where I looked at all my hormones. And only after I had all that collective information was I able to make those lifestyle adjustments little by little. Now, I don't, even though I'm not a firefighter anymore, it still affects me. Like my resiliency and my constitution will never be the same. So now I'm making sure I don't drink caffeine after 12 because I'm super sensitive to caffeine all of a sudden now that my adrenals got destroyed. Now I'm making sure that I begin my bedtime routine a little earlier because if I go to bed by 10, I can wake up without an alarm. As soon as I start moving into 11 or 12 o'clock, then I start getting in a place where I get limited sleep. Once I get limited sleep, I notice my libido start to go down and you really start to see the small signs that you weren't paying attention to, and you're able to make better lifestyle adjustments. You know, you mentioned earlier funding from the state. Can you tell me how you feel about what the state's state of mind is when it comes to this process? And is it hard to get funding for these initiatives?
No, I think that everyone's coming around to the idea that suicides with police officers and firefighters happens so often that it's a crisis. It's something that requires
Immediate
attention to
attention.
detail and just throw resources to try to solve it. So you're seeing all over the state different ways of trial and error, what might work, what doesn't work. I mean, after Alex Acosta's suicide, in an effort to keep building those 3 different doors through the fire department, through private insurance, through the union, or resiliency, I invited the fire chief and his mental health team. Some of them were sworn and some of them are civilian. Said, let's go up to New York because FDNY has been figuring these things out for
Since
60
9/11.
years. 60 years.
60, wow.
Their mental health unit actually finds its origins in an AA program they started 60 years ago. And back then, the only problem you had was you drink too much. And then they started to solve that. But then as drugs and other things started to manifest themselves, they've really developed a mature way of dealing with mental health issues. The thing that I think is most interesting is that the fire chief and a lieutenant, completely detached from his ladder truck, talk only when necessary about mental health. I, as a captain, could have called. Let's say you and I had been in their system 20 years ago, and if I had seen something wrong, I could have said, hey, you know what? I would call the ladder lieutenant that's there, say, hey, I think John, he would benefit from coming spend 2 weeks with you. And they take you, no questions asked. You get taken off the truck. You go to an old firehouse that no longer operates as a firehouse.
Wow.
There's on average 18, 25 members that are there for 2 weeks. And it's a firehouse, except for 2 things are different. You don't run calls, and that what would otherwise be dorms have been turned into offices so that you can walk in and talk to a counselor whenever you want.
Wow.
No questions asked.
Yeah.
You need to go and see them for 2 weeks. You're gone. We'll see you in 2 weeks. And the culture there has gotten to a point. They've opened 5 offices in the 5 boroughs so that there's always a place they can go. And after 2 weeks is kind of like that threshold. If they haven't processed what they're dealing with in a way that they can go back to work on a truck, they can ask for another 2 weeks, but it's a little bit higher of a hurdle because now, do we need to document this for that individual so that they have coverage if we don't fix it? I mean, it's a really good, mature system they developed, and they have a third-party entity that also provides counseling free of charge and anonymously, just like our resiliency. And it was very informative for us to be there and to kind of see how they interoperate, but they never commingle. You know what I mean? Like they will be there for anyone. And if they refer out, there's a referral, but nobody knows. It's really, to me, it's aspirational to go on that trip to go, there's a lot of good stuff we're doing that look like that. Let's steal a few more good ideas and get there faster.
Yeah. Have you noticed any improvement in like the amount of suicides in New York with that program? Has there been like
that? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I know that it ebbs and flows with disasters there. Like during COVID, they had a lot of issues that they were dealing with, like anywhere else in society was dealing with.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I know that it's so important to the FDNY that they continue to grow it.
Yeah,
they continue to invest in it because they see the value in those that return back to work. That they've had very serious issues that pop up in a firehouse that they can fix, and that person doesn't get fired, and they go back to work and they get to live their life, most importantly, after it's all over.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the message that I want to leave with first responders is that we are in a profession with a high amount of risk. The only way to mitigate that risk and change the trajectory of your career is to get out ahead of it, like they're doing in New York. You have to be proactive and understanding you're not like everybody else. That's the first mindset shift that we need to make. Understand that this job is inherently dangerous and these problems don't arise overnight.
Yeah.
So you have to do it before the problems arise. And this way you're going to be able to give yourself more leeway when it comes to dealing with high-level stressors. On top of getting out ahead of it, we have to also be supportive of it with the guys in the station and make it a community thing. You know, like if one guy goes and meditates, people are going to be like, he's over there meditating. But if it's like, guys, let's go do this stress relief training that's going to allow us to lower our stress levels. And it could be off shift. It doesn't need to always be on shift, but taking those proactive measures amongst each other, educating everybody, not just the brass, and then the brass also making it something that they actually invest in. We have no problem investing in tools, Halligans, K-12s, beautiful trucks, but we're not putting enough money into the guys yet, in my opinion. Like you said, we're at the top of the second inning. And I think the shift that's going to happen over the next 10 to 20 years is going to make firefighting and police work, and even nurses who are under a lot of stress. And like you said earlier, dispatchers. It's like we don't think about all the levels of stress and sleep deprivation that are prevalent in the first responder community. But now, and as weird as it sounds, I almost feel like Captain Gustin, he wanted to provide a final act for the fire, for his guys, to put a spotlight on the mental health issues. Because he's the kind of guy that would always sacrifice himself in a way. And I almost feel like there's a part of him that was like, this needs to be addressed. And I am the guy that everybody's going to take note of, you know, because we've heard about, like I said before, things happening. But when these franchise personalities who are known around the world, that's when you get this seismic shift in the attention. Have you noticed any change in attention since the last couple of weeks?
I think everybody's still trying to process it. I can tell you that what resonated with me was he always said, you need to be a student of the fire service. And I taught traffic incident management when I went from 7 to 30 and I started to run all these calls on 95, 2, 3, 4 serious car accidents a day. And I realized this is inherently way more dangerous than what I'm doing in house fires, because I might have one in a shift. I'm having 3 or 4 accidents out on an expressway with 100 people not paying attention, passing me every minute, going 80 miles an hour. And I started teaching that, and I teach that to every rank as they get promoted now. I wrote the SOP. We've argued to add more safety equipment. And he would sit in my class sometimes, not once, several times. He sat in my class to be a student, to learn from me. And he would give me the same thing, the phone calls. He would give me criticisms and critiques and thoughts and suggestions, invited me on a podcast to teach it around the country. And that's the one thing that kind of kept sticking with me when I was trying to deal with my own emotion, my pain from it. And I was like, I went back to who I was. Like, I tried to learn from it. Like, what do I learn? So I started pushing around the edges to figure out what positive message I could derive from this, and if there was one, and just try to figure it out. I think that his loss is going to take some time to kind of really work itself through our department. But it's right now, I think everybody just wants to honor him and show their love for him. I mean, the ideas that everyone has to memorialize him in perpetuity, it just speaks to how much people love the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what would you say you would want to see moving forward as the head of the union for firefighters when it comes to health and wellness?
They've got to put themselves first when they're not on a call. That when you're on a call, we took an oath. We swore we'd use our body as a lever.
Love that.
To push pain and disaster and danger away from people.
Wow.
But before and after that, you got to take care of yourself, because you can only use yourself as that shield so many times if you don't repair it. That has to be what we do. That means proactively cleaning your gear. That means taking a shower after a fire. That means eating and hydrating. It means
it's a lifestyle.
Not going to work if you're not mentally prepared for the day. Not using it as an excuse not to go to work. But
of course,
if you're not ready for whatever may come, don't put yourself in harm's way. Because if you put yourself in harm's way and you end up in a jam because you're not 100%, it puts all of us that have to come to your aid at risk, because we have to help you.
Yeah.
And there's a real maturity that comes with that. Like, you really have to to make sure you're ready to take care of other people, including the people you're going to get on the shift with, and hopefully leave to go home to their families. Like that has to be the lesson we keep working to get closer to.
Yeah. Well, you heard it, guys. When you're not on a call, save yourself first. Billy, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to speaking with you. I learned a lot today, and I look forward to our continued partnerships and growth and helping get this message out to the firefighters, the police officers, the nurses, and begin to create real change.
Thanks, man.